Hi, this is Doug Kaye, and I'm here with another of our interviews, Get to Know Our Members, and this time it's my fellow co-president, Steve Ziman. How you doing, Steve?
I'm doing fine, Doug.
Well, it's great to have you here. Started learning how to do these. I've done a lot of interviews in my time, but this is the first time I've been interviewing friends. I'm not used to doing that so much. Um, you sent me your resume, which is great. I knew some of this, but there are some things that I had completely forgotten. Um, you grew up in New York. You're pretty much a New Yorker. Is that right?
New Jersey, I spent the first 4 years or 5 years in Brooklyn Heights. You could actually look down on the East River then and see Manhattan. And I remember that as a kid, as I was a little bit older. My mother was living there. My father was at the Baltimore Army base. And so at the end of the war, he came back up. And then we moved to New Jersey, um, outside of Newark, and I stayed there until I graduated high school. So I guess in some respects, I'm a Jersey kid.
Well, and I don't know if you remember, but I had forgotten until I saw this. We both spent time in Brooklyn Heights because I lived there for the 13 years I lived in New York. The corner, I think of, yeah, Henry and Pierpont was the intersection where I lived. So, and then before that was Remsen Street. So we both had some overlaps there. Well, not overlaps, but we've lived in some similar places.
Correct.
Very good. Okay, so I love your resume because it's a mix of your professional career as an organic chemical engineer, but also the politics you got involved with. So, where did you do your undergraduate work?
I went to University of Michigan,
Okay.
and I was there 63 through 67. That was the start of Vietnam. We had the first Vietnam teach-in at Michigan, and of course, we all went and marched. It was also the era of civil rights. Uh, so we spent a lot of time out in the streets marching.
Yeah. Now, did you start in chemical engineering and end up, or did you have a transition while you were in school?
I started actually, I thought I was going to be a math major, and then I wound up in chemistry, not chemical engineering. Uh, and I really got into it. I really enjoyed it. It was fascinating.
Yeah.
So
And then you eventually got specifically into organic. Is that right?
correct.
Yeah.
And at the end of graduation, I decided I wanted to go to grad school. And so off I went to University of Wisconsin, and it was a top-notch grad school for the area I was in. And of course, it was also one of the most active campuses during the heyday of the Vietnam War and the protests.
Yeah.
Uh,
So is that pretty much where you got your political start? Is that what got you involved?
I think it was that. It was my folks. My folks were always pretty active when we talked about things at the dinner table. I had a cousin who was on the New York staff as a New York City Commission on Human Rights. She took me on one of the first Vietnam marches, I think in 1966. We went to the March on Washington. Her husband worked for Sane. So, it was sort of in the DNA in that sense.
Mhm.
Uh,
So, you had sort of two parallel lives for a while. You had your chemistry work, which you did for a couple of different companies, variety of companies. Um, you made at some point when you were younger a cross-country trip to California, and I guess you fell in love with California. Is that right?
yeah, it was my second year of grad school, and three of us piled in my car and we drove. And it was actually the first time I saw the West. We hit the national parks, we hit Yellowstone, we hit the Tetons, we came across Nevada, we came into across the Sierras, um, and into San Francisco and Berkeley and down to LA, and then back through the other national parks in Colorado. Um, and when I got back, I used to have a picture of New York in my bedroom, and I immediately took it down and put up a picture of the Sierras.
Very symbolic. I like that a lot. Okay. And then at some point you got involved with, particularly with working with George McGovern and his politics. Tell us that story.
I was I went to Stanford afterwards. 1971 was a recession; you could not get a job, so I and many of my friends did postdocs. And I went to Stanford, and I got involved with the McGovern campaign. I was a precinct captain. My research wasn't going all that well, but I was a postdoc. I didn't have to publish to get out of there. And so I got involved with that. And one day he was downtown, and I brought my camera and I took this picture. And there he was surrounded by these two big, bulky guys, one of whom I learned later on was an All American tackle from Oklahoma. And so I have that picture actually on my desk someplace here. I probably can reach for it, I won't. But I have that picture. And then after I got out, and I did get a job, I went to work for DuPont back in Wilmington, Delaware. And I always wanted to come back to California. I really wanted to come back. And I got involved with the Sierra Club in Delaware, and I was leading backpack trips. I started backpacking when I was a postdoc in the Sierra. And so I was leading backpack trips, and I got involved with some of those things and all that. But I wanted to come back. And as luck would have it, I found a job out here, and it was with Ortho at Richmond. And so my first wife and I moved back out. We rented a house in San Francisco in the Sunset, and off I went. And I was involved with things, environmental groups out here. Again, the Sierra Club, I again led backpack trips for the Bay chapter. I learned to snow camp and led those. I got involved in some of the activities and so forth. So yeah, that was sort of it. And in 1970, I think 78 or 79, I learned about something that you could go to Washington, D.C. and the American Association for the Advancement of Science had a program, and a number of the scientific societies participated. And I applied through the American Chemical Society, and it put PhD scientists and engineers either on a member's staff or in a committee or subcommittee. So I did that, and I got selected, and I went to Washington. I spent a year in Washington, and I worked on the staff of an old-time liberal congressman named George Brown from Riverside. And I wound up doing science policy and other things. I worked on revising the Earthquake Hazard Reduction Act. It was important to me. And I really learned a lot about policy, politics, how sausage is really made, and so forth. So it's always been there.
Well, somehow that makes you uniquely qualified to be the president of the photo club. You have a background in real legislation and politics. How long were you there?
I was there for a year. Some of the folks I was with in my class stayed. I couldn't wait to get back west. And so I came back, but I didn't want to be a research chemist anymore. And I had gone to Nepal when I came back, my first trip outside the US. And one of the folks on the trip, her father worked in the environmental area in Chevron. He was an environmental manager. And she told him, and I talked with him, and I interviewed for a position. I wound up in a corporate environmental group, and I flipped the coin. I wound up doing air quality.
That's
And,
fascinating.
You know,
what a transition, huh?
it was a transition. And as I always like to joke, 30 years later, I was really dangerous.
Yeah.
I could talk with the rest of the scientists.
Okay, so you were involved with ortho, Chevron for the rest of your career. Is that right?
That's correct. I wound up working in various locations, but always in the Bay Area. It's one of the things I always did is whenever they asked where you want your next assignment, I basically bounded it by the Bay Area. But I did get to travel. I got overseas. I went to Kazakhstan. We were just starting a joint venture there. And shifting to when I retired, I was given an opportunity to teach week-long environmental courses with one of my friends. And we wound up all over the world. Not everyone gets to go to Angola. Not everyone wants to go to Angola. Lagos, Nigeria is interesting, but I did get to Sumatra. I got to Western Australia, went to Kazakhstan 2 more times. And, you know, when we did those things, we could always take a few extra weeks and so forth. And so Susan, my wife now, would fly over and meet me, and we'd go to, you know, different places in Europe. And she went, and we spent a month in Australia. So we had a good time. I really enjoyed teaching.
Not bad, not bad. So, and now, so you retired, was it 2009? I think you retired, something like that?
I retired in 2006. I taught these courses until the beginning of 2015, and then they retired me. When the price of oil went, they got rid of all their consultants.
Is that going to happen again over there? I wonder.
I don't know. I'm glad I'm out of it.
Yeah, I'll bet. Okay. All right. This is great. Fascinating. What, again, I'm always amazed at our club members and the careers they've had, especially when you're as old as we are. We all have done a lot. There's no doubt about it. But let's talk photography. Let's talk photography. What were your earliest experiences with photography?
I think part of it was my folks used to take me into Manhattan, and we would go to museums. And I remember going to MoMA. And so you had one of the really good photography departments was at MoMA as well. So I got exposed to photography. And in particular, I still remember an exhibit, Ansel Adams exhibit. And I think Dorothea Lange and others like that, the classic photographers who either did landscape or who were the WPA photographers from the 40s. So that's my first exposure. I think I got my first camera when I went out west on that trip I told you about. My uncle loaned me a twin lens reflex Rolleicord. And all I remember was following the film. It said, if you do this, you take a picture. If it's sunny, you do this. You know, I didn't know anything. And then I enjoyed that. So I bought myself a single lens reflex. And it was an old Minolta SRT 101. And that's when I started taking, really starting to take pictures. They weren't great. It was mainly throw it in the backpack and off we go. And, you know, we'll take pictures of where we've been, or throw it in the backpack and off we go and take pictures of Nepal and all that. And I've looked at some.
Yeah, I'll bet. So we're gonna in a bit we're gonna look at some of your photos. I don't know what you've collected to show us and how far back they go. Do you have anything from that long ago?
I think I may have. I mean, I started off by putting in some about the first few of just me and my family and all that, just to give a brief view of that.
Let's switch over to that. Why don't you share your screen and let's go through sort of to whatever you've prepared for your biography in photography, whatever that is. Let's take a look at it.
Okay.
The magic of Zoom here.
Okay, so let me.
All right, we've got it.
Okay, full screen. So this is me and my mother and my father back in New Jersey. I was about 5 years old. And that's my sister. I should say, as we go on, I'm going to go to the next one. Everything said and done, I've got two brothers, a sister, and that's my brother-in-law. He's another brother. My two brothers are a lot younger than I am, 18 and 20 years younger, because my mother passed away when I was 11 and my father remarried.
Uh,
And there came the second family. But we're a real close family. We enjoy each other, we visit with each other, and so forth. This is me when I
I love
had hair,
I love it. I love it.
and that's my father, and that's my stepmother, who has always been my mother.
Mhm.
Man, was she young then.
Really?
God, it turns out she's only 15 years, was only 15 years older than I am.
Uh-huh.
So that's me in my when I was a chemist. You'll notice it says condemned and this and that and the other thing. I work with some very, very smelly compounds. And
I thought you were going to say very smelly people.
and I used to have the theoretical chemists come up to the lab complaining about the odors, because apparently the out vent in my lab was right near the invent in their lab, and the odors went out and into their lab 3 floors down. I always thought
Gotcha.
that was funny. That's Susan. That's Susan and I when we started dating. And God, that was probably up in Marin someplace. Man, that was a long time ago. I think that was, yeah, 1982. That's the first one. He's now 32 years old, but that's David. That's Ben. That's he's 30. I love this is Ben. It spoke for it. Skateboarding is not a crime. Um, by the time he was 10, he and his friends were taking Muni all over the place to skateboard. By the time he was 12, he knew all the metro systems in the Bay Area.
Hmm.
This is one of our trips. We went up to Alaska. We took the kids up, and I'm surprised they're in front of the ropes, to be honest. David got his master's and master's in public policy. And it was a little while later, he got married, and that's our first grandson, who's now 7 months old. And that's Susan holding him.
Excellent.
That's David's wife, Sherry, and they live in Larkspur now, and that's great. It's really great to have them. This
And
is the younger one, and
yeah, I was going to say, where's the other one living?
right now he's in Merced in a holding pattern. That's his girlfriend. This is from December. He had just defended his thesis. He's got a PhD in cell and molecular biology. He has a postdoc offer at City of Hope, but City of Hope, which is in Pasadena, is closed right now, like every other place. And so he's sort of marooned in Merced until City of Hope opens up, and he'll go down there and start his postdoc.
Very good.
That is me. That's on top of Mount Lassen with Mount Shasta in the background. So somebody else took that. And that's me in Kazakhstan, the guy in the red T-shirt on the bottom there. We flew around in this thing for, I think, 6 or 8 hours. It was 100 degrees, and we were looking for water to see where and what water sources there were. It's real fun flying in a very noisy, very hot Russian helicopter.
I bet.
And that's the newest member of the family. You've seen him occasionally. Deja, well, Deja just gets treated better than the kids, and the kids keep complaining. You treat a dog better than you treat us, which is true.
Of course it is.
This is, I guess, one of the first pictures I remember. 1977, the Twin Towers had just opened up, and we went there, and we went all the way to the top. You could go outside. Maybe, did you do that, Doug? Did you ever go up to the
I
top?
I actually shot an industrial film on the roof of number
Oh,
two.
okay. But, every once in a while, I look back at this picture, and it just brings back memories. And particularly when my brother was getting married, a month before 9/11. We were back in New York with the kids, and we said, "Hey, you want to go down Twin Towers?" And they said, "No." Later on, they said, "Had we known, God." So, yeah. This is, again, earlier pictures. This is someplace up in Nepal. It is a monastery. It's a Mani Rimdu festival. Um, the monks are wearing masks. They were a little bit inebriated, and yeah, it was fun. So I did 2 treks in Nepal. 1983, 2 of my friends talked me into going to Alaska, and I had read Coming into the Country, John McPhee's book, and I think that's why I wanted to go. And we flew, we got to Fairbanks and flew up to a little town 80 or 100 miles north of the Arctic Circle, and then got on a seaplane, a little Cessna, and we flew in and landed on a lake, and we were there for 12 days. There are no trails there. There were I think we saw 4 people. And we did see a grizzly bear or 2. We saw moose. We saw caribou. This is in Gates of the Arctic. A wonderful, wonderful place in the Brooks Range.
Gorgeous.
Susan and I went to Australia in '86. I think it was, we spent a month there. This is Ayers Rock. We got out there. We drove all over different parts of Australia. We were together 24/7. We still liked each other afterwards. And then she talked me into getting married.
Aha.
She's talked me into getting married. She's talked me into getting kids. I've never been the one who said, "Let's do this." I've always said, "Yeah, sounds like a good idea."
Now the question is, how do we all survive the pandemic where we have no choice but to be together?
uh, this was on the west side of Australia. This is when we were up in Perth, and there were these pinnacles, weird things. Nobody knows exactly how or what the geology is, what the history of the geology is. They were just weird.
But do you know, are they granite? Are they limestone? What do you know what they
I
are?
think they're probably limestone, because almost everything on that side is either limestone or sedimentary. But yeah, they're interesting. 19, oh God, let's see, 79, I think. No, I take it back. Excuse me, 2007. One of my friends and I went down to Patagonia, and this is Fitzroy in the morning. It's a spectacular mountain. And we just got out there and stood out there and froze and took pictures. This is Cuernos, again in Patagonia. This is Torre del Paine, and this is walking around. We did about a 6 or 7 day loop in there, and went hut to hut, and you just put everything on your back and off you went. Mm-hmm. This was my first trip, second trip to China. The friend that I had gone to Patagonia with, I've known him for 30 years. I met him snow camping. And Rick and I have just gone on trips, and he convinced me to go to China, and we've now been to China 6 times, something like that. This is the rice terraces in Yunnan province, early morning. Just a wonderful place.
They look huge. I mean, it just looks like it's a
they
gigantic
are.
area.
It drops. It probably drops 2,000 feet. It's just beautiful. This is up in the Xinjiang province, which is the Uyghur Autonomous Region. And you've heard about the Uyghurs probably because the Chinese are repressing them more recently, we've heard about education, quote unquote, education camps. But this was on the Karakoram Highway, which goes from Kashgar down to Pakistan. And that's a yak. And just out there in the middle of nowhere. This was near Guilin. These are limestone karsts, and it's you go out there in the fog, and it's just a wonderful place to go and walk around. And we spent a fair amount of time down there. This is Zhangjiajie. This is a national forest park, and it is in Hunan province. And we actually walked up through this one morning. We went out. It was so foggy, we didn't think we'd see anything. And we just waited, and we got lucky. Bamboo forest. This is in Sichuan province, and it's just a marvelous area. I really, really, really was happy being able to get this shot.
We've all seen a lot of bamboo pictures. I have quite a few myself, but this one is really nice. I like this.
This is another national park in Hunan province. It's a fairly new one, and we got there, and there was no one there. Literally, there was no one there. It was just really, really an amazing place. And we had it to ourselves for 2 days. Again, the rock formations, this is one of the things I've always been impressed with, Doug, in China. You have so much wonderful geology there. And I love the places and the natural beauty that you can find in almost all of China.
Mm-hmm. Steve, one question for you here while I think of it. When you make these trips, are you with a group? Are you hiring local guides? What have you been doing most recently on these trips to Asia?
We started off with a guide who had a small business in Chengdu. He was recommended to us. And we've always done it with a guide, a driver, a vehicle, and the two of us. And so when we've done these trips, and we've done all of them with Philip, who's one of the owners,
mm-hmm.
and when we've done these, we correspond with him and his wife, and we say, okay, so here's where we want to go, and they make suggestions. We do a lot of research, and we put together basically a trip that we want to do. And the nice thing about it is Phillips has been our guide on most of them. We get along very well. He's a bird photographer, a very good one. And he knows what we like, which is really good. And we also can change things on the fly. So it's turned out a number of times where we said, this spot's just not working out. What do we want to do? And off we go. And in the middle of it, Philip will call his wife Lily and say, get them a hotel and such, and off we go again. So that's how we've done it. And we've become friends with them now, to the point that we're helping them with their website. We get assignments. Would you read this for English?
All right, we'll go back to your pictures here. All right, good.
This was in Vietnam. I wanted to go to Vietnam, and I went about 3 or 4 years ago, I guess. And I just liked this window, and you could look into it.
I've seen this picture before. I like that a lot. You're now into images that I recognize.
This is in Myanmar, and This is a very famous long bridge. Jean Marito also has some pictures of this as well. Uh, this is down in Bagan. Uh, Bagan is a city of temples, and it's really a pretty place. We got up early in the morning. We had a small group, but our guide basically said, anyone who wants to go see the sunrise in the morning, let me know. And I think there were three of us. And off we went. Back in Vietnam, these are all the karsts in northern part of Vietnam. Um, and that was the moonrise.
Mm-hmm.
This was in Iceland. This is the famous church in Reykjavik.
On the backside.
Everyone goes to the front side. I went to the back side, and then I just took out the sky, and I, did that. I liked it.
Yeah.
This is Death Valley. This is up by Eureka Dunes. I love Red Rock. I love deserts. That's where I want to go. I need a Red Rock fix at least once a year. And we were just out here and caught a very nice sunrise. This is up in where is Colorado. And again, just being up on a ridge, looking down this escarpment.
So it looks like a fault line, doesn't it?
It does look like a fault line.
Yeah.
The Palouse. And about, I think 3 years ago, my older one and I took a trip out to Glacier, and then we drove back across eastern Washington and stopped in the Palouse, and it was fall. So we, instead of seeing the wheat, we saw the results when they cut it, and the patterns in there are just really, really great.
Mm-hmm.
This is in Glacier, and it was one of these, sunsets that just doesn't stop. We just sat out in the lake and took pictures, drank beer and took pictures.
Not a bad thing to do.
This was flying into Missoula, I think, and there was a lot of haze, and it might have been fires. And I just took this out of the plane window. And this is down at Valley of Fire, one of my favorite places to go to, just outside Las Vegas, about 40 or 50 miles. It can be very crowded, but if you get up at 6 o'clock, there's no one there.
Hmm.
And so I just drove out there, and this is a White Hill or something like that. And then, of course, this is, the forgotten bridge, as it were. I mean, we have the Bay Bridge now, the new Bay Bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge, and then the Richmond Bridge is sort of the, nobody thinks about the Richmond Bridge, but I can see it from the end of the main street in my neighborhood, and I just got a bunch of great clouds in it. What I showed you all, for the most part, was landscapes, and I really didn't do that many people picture until I went to China, and people were friendly and they let us take pictures. This was a very small village. We walked in, we were walking around, we asked the headman if we could do it, and he said yes. And so we started walking around, and this family came out, the guy in the back and his wife, and we took their picture, and then we kept walking around, and then he tapped us on the shoulder and said, "Come on back. I want a picture of the whole family."
Uh-huh.
And so there we are.
Great.
This is up in Kashgar. This is the Sunday market, and this little kid was just sitting there. I guess he was waiting for his father or whatever. Uh, this is our most recent trip. This is a horse festival, uh, and it's a Tibetan horse festival. And the riders are just phenomenal. The control they have of their horses is unbelievable. And we got there early in the morning, staked ourselves out, uh, and just waited. And we had a good location.
You know, compared to all the rodeo things we see in the photo club with all the big signs and commercials and advertising, this is a breath of fresh air by comparison.
Oh yeah,
Really
oh
nice. And
yeah.
a nice, the background is nice, but the outfits and the blowing hair, the horse movements, it's a nice shot, Steve.
This was again the most recent trip, and this is called a debate. This was a monastery, and one group of monks would stand up and they would try to uh, get the goat of the monks sitting down, uh, talking about the finer points of Tibetan Buddhism. And there's clapping and there's finger pointing and there's yelling and this and that and the other thing. And we went into the midst of this and we stood there for almost 45 minutes and nobody cared. They knew we were there. They were, in some respects, I think they're at least immune to it, but sometimes they turned around and smiled at us. Uh, so it was really interesting to watch. This is a previous trip, and this is how they make salt. He's stirring a huge pot of saline, salt water, and slowly the salt will settle out. This was a monk in Vietnam in the Mekong Delta area. And we got him when he was ringing the bell. And then, you know, as Keith would say, no more monks.
I was waiting for that. Yes.
But when we were in Bagan, again, the guide we were with said, do you want to go out early in the morning? Another morning, we said yes. And so we talked with one of his friends who was a photographer, and we were able to get these young monks in inside, and it just worked out very well. Um,
I should explain for those club members who haven't been around for too long. We went through a period of a few years ago of a rash of pictures of young monks to the point where Keith, one of our members, just at one point just announced at the meeting, "No more monks." But this is a beautiful picture, Steve.
and that's the same too at
Yeah.
another point. Yeah. This is probably one of my favorite people pictures. We were in Manhattan. We were in Zabar's. Susan and I were sitting there getting something to eat. And I just looked at this woman, and she was so lost in her own thoughts. And I probably shot 20 pictures of her. She never moved. But, it, I don't know what she was thinking, but I loved it.
She just she just reads Upper West Side to me.
Yes. And of course, this is in Times Square, and these are the Disney characters. And these guys were just sitting out there. They were tired. I'm sure they were hot. Uh, and I was just able to, get them. Again, Upper West Side. This is Broadway in '96. Uh, I have one of my brothers actually lives up on 99th and Broadway, and so I love to walk up and down Broadway from his house. These guys are there occasionally playing chess. I walked all over the place taking pictures of them. They were so oblivious to it. But I've seen these guys since, and they, you know, they are into their game.
Mm-hmm.
I think you've seen this one. This is also on Broadway. Uh, it's The Discussion, and these two
Mm-hmm.
guys were just looking at each other and, you know, talking deep in conversation. This is actually in a Chinese restaurant, Henry's Hunan down in the Excelsior, and we just went down to eat. One of my friends was down there, and as we're waiting, I had my camera with me, and this woman was just meditating before she got her uh, dinner. And I just thought the light and everything else was really great. So
Perfect,
that's
perfect light. Yeah.
the old dope peddler with his rounds of powdered joy. If you remember Tom Lear,
Tom Lair. Yeah.
yeah, this is Hate Street Fair. And then I've just gotten into Carnival and Day of the Dead and so forth. And so this was face painting and Day of the Dead. And this is Carnival. And that's Carnival,
Of course.
of course, as is that. And that's the last one. I know you've seen that, Doug. That's the ferry building in the back on a rainy day. His family just standing there. So,
Great.
yeah,
Great. All right. Why don't you go ahead and unshare?
I'm going.
So it's interesting. I didn't know what you were going to show us. It was really fun to see that. Um, I Something that you wrote about, which I picked up on, was your transition. You mentioned this briefly, but the transition from sort of landscape to discovering that you like to interact with and photograph people. Tell us about that transition for you.
I think it was hard. I mean, everyone talks about the idea of shooting people, and you're almost afraid, in some respects, that they're going to punch you in the face or something like that. I mean, I think we all have that reaction. Um, I find, you know, sometimes they're candid, as a bunch of those were, and sometimes I'll walk up and I'll just say, you know, I want to take your picture. Can I take your picture? Um, and I'll wind up talking with people. Uh, I know you guys saw a picture that I had of Reggie, the saxophone player. Um, I wound up talking with him for 20 minutes. My kids tell me that I can talk to anyone. They sometimes get embarrassed. They used to be embarrassed. Dad, you just talk to anyone. Uh, but I like the character. I like the face. It's you know, it's human life, uh, and you can get everything from pathos to joy and so forth. And so when the street photography section started, I really wanted to get into it, and I just have enjoyed either going into the city to shoot early in the morning. As I say, Manhattan, I love to shoot Manhattan. I walk all over the city, and there's so many good characters. And as you know, they're so oblivious.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could put a camera in front of somebody's face half the time, and they wouldn't know or they wouldn't say a word. But
It's true.
I really enjoy going out and shooting people.
Yeah. And every city is very different, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
So when did you join the Marin Photo Club?
I think it was 2012. I had
Uh-huh.
moved up to Marin in 2010, and I had taken, I think, 3 or 4 photo courses at City College after I retired. And so I was taking pictures, but when I came up, I wanted to get more involved. And I can't remember how, but I found out about the club and I joined the club. And it was the time when we were still over in the old church. And I figured the best way to really get to know people was to volunteer to do something. And so I started off as the assistant print chair.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I got to know people. And I went from assistant print chair to print chair, and along the way, I did other things. I went to Cuba with you, which was a great trip, and I got to know some people very well, and it was very, very enjoyable trip. And I've just gotten more involved.
That's great.
You know,
So you mentioned the classes at City College, and I think I understood from what you sent me that that was a bit of a transition for you too, that you began to take your photography more seriously. You actually began to study it more as opposed to do it perhaps more
yeah,
casually. I don't know what. Tell us about what how that changed what you did, and you know,
I
and
think
also mentioned also some of the people who influenced you at that point in your life, some of the photographers.
uh, again, it was you know, still the classics, the Imogene Cunninghams. Um, I'm going to draw a blank. It shows I'm 75 years old,
It's
starting to
okay.
draw blanks. But you
I'll
know,
let you off. You're off the hook
the
on that one.
the group 64 and then the WPA photographers, I think, really still. But I took a beginning Photoshop course and an intermediate course, and we actually did a few critiques.
Mm.
Um, the people in those courses, a lot of them wanted to actually do photography for a living, and some of them are doing it. Um, and so it forced you to look at and ask the questions of what are you looking at, how do you compose, and so forth. I took a course in uh, light, not lighting, but light, and that was really good as well to get me think about light, shadows, and so forth. Um, and it really started me uh, thinking more about what I was doing. And then I started entering into the Marin County Fair. So even when I lived in San Francisco, I was putting things in and I got stuff accepted. So I was happy.
Yeah.
And then when I found out about the photo club up here, uh, I joined. And you know, with street photography, with salon, with just going out with everyone and shooting, it's really made me, I think, much more cognizant of my photography, what I'm doing. I think I've improved. I hope I have. Uh, so, yeah, I've been really, really pleased and happy to be a member of the club. Uh, it's it's done a lot for me, and I'm trying to give back as well.
Very good. So now that we're under pretty much lockdown for a while, photographically, what are you doing to keep yourself active?
Well, I am. I ride my bike. I either hike or ride my bike every other day. My wife thinks if I stood still, I would just fall apart. Uh, but uh, I throw my little RX 100 in my back of my bike shirt and go down to downtown San Rafael and see if I see interesting things. Uh, I will walk down there. I'll just throw the camera. I'll bring the camera with me and see if I see any nice lighting in the bay from up on the hill. I live China Camp's my backyard, literally. Um, and then I've gone into the city once or twice, just because I was curious what the city looked like. And uh, I saw the homeless down there who are now on the street. I mean, it's depressing. But at the same time, I wanted to take images um, of it as much because people should see that. And they don't. We live up here in a bubble sometimes. Uh, and we really don't appreciate or understand how well we have it.
That's
And
true.
you see pictures of people who are lined up around the corner to get a meal at Glide. Uh, they don't even have masks. They can't practice social distancing because they're hungry. Um, and things like that. So yeah, I've found things to photograph.
Very good. So my last question is, what what do you imagine would be the first thing you'd like to do when your movements and travel are unrestricted? Is there a place you want to go? Is there something you want to photograph? What are you itching to do as soon as you're able?
Well, I want to go back to Red Rock Country. I want to get out to Utah. Um, and I'm supposed to go to Bhutan. I don't think the trip will go, but I'm supposed to go to Bhutan in the end of October. I really want to go. If it's not this year, it'll be next year. I want to go back and see the Himalaya. Uh, uh, and I want to go back to Southeast Asia. I just
Yeah.
love going out that way.
Oh, it sounds great. All right. Well, Steve, thanks very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you today. As I said, we have just fascinating people who are members of our club with incredible backgrounds, photographic and otherwise. So I hope to see you soon. And it's also been a pleasure working with you as co-president. I know I couldn't do it by myself. I don't know how you feel, but it's turned out to be quite a bit of work.
It has. It has. Every day I come in, like I was out 2 days ago and I spent 3 hours hiking up the hills up here. I came in, I had 20 more Gmails. Most of them were with the club. And I'm saying, oh my God. By the time I get back, the responses have been made already and all that. It's like, what I miss? What am I
And
shirking?
it was hard enough before we had to make the transition to do everything online. And that transition has gone pretty well, but it's taken quite a bit of work, hasn't it?
It has taken quite a bit of work, but you know what? I think we're doing things that the members want and like. That's really good.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
All right, Steve, again, thanks very much. We'll get this online so everybody can take a look at it. Appreciate it. And again, this is Doug Kaye. We'll be back for another episode of Meet the Members. And thank you very much, everybody, for staying with us. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Doug.